My name is Elizabeth Wilson. I'm a professor here in environmental studies at Dartmouth and director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. And I'm really excited today, as part of our new energy conversations with early career researchers, to have our colleagues from Arizona State University really take it over. And so today's talk will be hosted by Clark Miller, who is the director for the Center for Energy and Society at ASU. And the talk today will be on understanding the energy poverty nexus, a transdisciplinary approach for designing sustainable energy transitions with Saurabh Biswas. So with that, Clark, I'll turn it over to you and we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It's really great to be here. This is such a fantastic webinar series, and it's been wonderful to be part of it, to listen to all of the great talks, and now to have a chance to share with you one of our newly minted PhD products, Saurabh Biswas, who finished a couple of months ago with his dissertation on this topic. I think this topic is incredibly important as we really think about the energy transition going forward and the need to pay attention to how that transition not only impacts a variety of different people across the world in a variety of different contexts, but more particularly how it's an opportunity to create new relationships and new dynamics between economic security on the one hand, as well as human security and so forth, and the energy system. The energy system has for too long, for too many people in the world, been a source of economic and social insecurity. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Saurabh, and looking forward to the presentation. Saurabh, great to have you here.
Thank you, Clark, and thank you, Elizabeth, for this opportunity. I really appreciate you organizing this, and as Clark mentioned, this has been my PhD topic, and I've been working in the area of energy access and energy off-grid energy solutions for a while now, and I'm really eager to share with you some of my findings and some of the research that I've done around understanding the energy poverty nexus and how this has evolved into a framework for transdisciplinary research in understanding sustainable energy transitions. So as Clark mentioned, I graduated this summer with my PhD in sustainability, and now I'm a postdoc at the School for the Future of Innovation in Society. And I also coordinate the Grassroots Energy Innovation Lab at the school. So let me situate myself here in this entire context as to where my inspiration comes from. So in the picture, this is me several years ago working with a community in the northeast part of India in a remote rural place, where I, as a designer, as an engineer and system designer, wanted to understand their concerns on what kind of energy system they would like. And to my surprise, at that point of time, it turned out they were far more concerned about being able to preserve their traditional forestry practices. So this community in their culture, there is a aspect of a sacred forest. So they were concerned about being able to carry out their practices around that. They were also skeptical about unkept promises from past development projects, including energy projects, of local jobs, accountability to the community, and consultations with the community at different stages. So this was a time, and then it was also at that time, this was a time when scholarship started to emerge about this relationship and the complexity. And something that was very obvious is that people in marginalized or difficult situations will take energy handouts when given, but not necessarily like them, and certainly not be able to achieve transformative change in their lives, and as a result, deepen their mistrust in any future initiatives. So what was important here as a lesson was that people anywhere have imaginaries of a happy and vibrant future. And energy services may be implicit or explicitly part of them, but more often than not, energy experts tend to paint the picture as an energy future and a question of energy transition. So, often you would see presentations and talks about energy access begin with statistics on how 1 million people do not have access to electricity, 2 billion people across the world do not have access to reliable cooking fuel. I'm not doing that for a reason that I find from my own experiences doing research across the world and speaking to colleagues who do similar research, that the challenge of human development and the human condition is universal. Everywhere there is an energy system and everywhere there is not an energy system, challenges with the development aspect exist. So the differences between publics, experts, and the idea and the imaginaries of development is a question then of misaligned worldviews amongst people, stakeholders in the mix, or misinterpreted imaginaries of how people imagine development, whether they imagine an energy development or development for a better life, quality of life, and which creates false binaries. So this is a cartoon from India by a famous cartoonist, satirist, political satirist, R.K. Lakshman, depicting that dilemma. Now the question is, why is human well-being so complex, and where does the energy system fit in? So over the years, several people have described well-being in many different ways. So I take a holistic definition that came out of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of human well-being being composed of at least 3 dimensions. The fundamental need for human biology to maintain the body and life, conditions that can sustain social life and avoid negative pressures, and the third being the ecosystem services that are necessary to drive all of this. And then this translates into goals set by different projects and programs and policy in terms of quality of life, in terms of social justice parameters, property rights and happiness, and many other goals. So you see that it's not really straightforward. It's layered, it has multiple dimensions, and it has a temporal and spatial aspect to it. So from this, I mean, it is fairly uncontested to say that access to energy would not necessarily lead to human development or well-being. So the UN Human Development Program categorizes 2 dimensions of human development, one being the direct enhancement of human capabilities by utilizing resource in terms of health, in terms of knowledge, economic capability. And then the second dimensions is those conditions that facilitate the achievement of these goals, which could include security, environmental stability, justice, etc. And then it comes as no surprise that recent evidence has been pointing to the fact is that, as it was expected a decade or so ago, that universal electricity would revolutionize and pull millions of people out of poverty. That's not really the case. There's something missing there. So that brings me to my broader research question is, where are the people in energy access research? This is a question that I asked when I first met my advisor 5 years ago. And we had the same question, albeit from different perspectives. But yeah, this was mostly the concern that if we are talking about energy systems and transitions and access, but for whom? Where are the people there? So, a quick review of some of the concepts that have been dominating research, scholarship, and practice in the energy space. And a major part of transition has been energy poverty. So, it's been a driving force, and it's necessarily a consumption-oriented and appliance-centered worldview of the energy and human development relationships. So you see it being defined in terms of number of electrons being consumed, availability and affordability, ownership of appliances, leading to a set of human development indicators. But an unknown, a black box in the middle, is how this conversion happens. Is there impact on, yes, you can measure it through indicators, but what is the impact on people's well-being parameters? So although that's appealing in its simplicity and quantifiability, there's really little insight on the conversion and how people are utilizing energy to achieve outcome. A second and more recent framing that has gaining ground in energy access research and energy transition in general is the framing of Nexus. So there has been several framings. Some of the more popular ones are the water, energy, and food. There's the water, waste, and energy nexus. And then there is, in terms of the SDGs, the interlinkages between the different SDGs and how there is mutual impact. But a criticism that has emerged of these nexus framings is that these are managerialist framings that that are primarily concerned about mobilizing technological innovation from a planning and resource management point of view in the process of transition. Still, no people. So that brings me down to the precise questions that I'm concerned with and why I thought an explicit investigation of energy and people in terms of poverty and human well-being outcomes is necessary is captured in this picture from my fieldwork in the Philippines, where this kid living in a slum outside of Manila is working in the family business of peeling garlic, which his parents go out and sell at night. So there's a light bulb in the background, and the purported outcomes of extended study hours and improved educational outcomes are apparently not happening because the school is 100 steps away from this kid. He's not in school, he's working in the family business because, it's a trade-off that has happened. So moving from there and centering the human condition and poverty into a research framework, and deliberately decentering energy imaginaries to become part of the overall imaginary of achieving well-being can be visualized in terms of the individuals or communities being surrounded by several infrastructural systems that include energy, that include water, food, governance, livelihood, their environment, etc. But to translate them to outcomes, people possess a certain set of personal and social capabilities that help translate these resources into outcomes that either improve the situation of poverty or further deepen it. Now, clearly the intent here is to understand in greater depth the energy system and how the energy system interacts with this broader system of human development. So breaking out the structures, as you can see, I've broken out in the energy system into its formative layers or elements in terms of the individuals being at the center in the pursuit of well-being. Then there's the electricity and fuel ecosystem and the use patterns around it, the infrastructure, supply systems. Then there's the governance, financing, and management aspect to it. And then there's the global political economy at work. Then a key aspect here that I would draw your attention to, and which often gets missed, is the web of the non-material aspects of social life that this entire infrastructural or material ecosystem sits in. So it includes culture, social forms of organization and solidarity, values, the relationship of people and nature in different places, the politics, customs, traditions. So this is a conceptual schematic that seeks to understand the formative elements of the system in which people are situated. Now from here, the next step is to understand the dynamics of the nexus or the relationship. So this is a four-step process which begins with deconstructing patterns of well-being and poverty, maybe dependent or independent of the energy system, then identify the role of energy in those relationships, And third, understand the process of conversion of energy to well-being. And then finally, identify the variety of pushes and pulls emerging from different places of the system and different attributes that drive away the trajectory from achieving the well-being or towards it. So now, so finally, this leads to the framing of the energy poverty nexus, which I present as a meta-theoretical framework for understanding the energy and human development relationship. So as you can see, there are interactions between various layers, there are interactions between the different infrastructural subsystems, and there is interaction between the socio-cultural dimension of people's lives and the infrastructural systems that are situated. Now, the energy poverty nexus here can be framed in 4 dimensions. The first is the availability of forms of energy in places that it's needed. The second is the socioeconomic capabilities of individuals and households to translate or convert that available energy to well-being. The third is pressures and deficiencies in that emerge from other parts of the system that work towards limiting the availability or the conversion capability. And then the fourth dimension is a typical complex systems characteristic of cascade effects and feedback loops that emerge from actions and actors and over time and space and work towards creating negative consequences that deepen overall poverty. So let me quickly take you through a case of investigating the energy poverty nexus from a research site. So this is a cluster of villages in the northern Himalayan state of Uttarakhand in India, where this 6 villages have been operating a mini hydro-based microgrid, which for 30 years now, it's been serving their needs. So understanding the energy poverty nexus in this community began with mapping out the different elements of the socio-energy system. So in this figure, you can see there are different actors situated at different layers, starting with the government entities to local governance to the technology providers, the maintenance folks, and then of course the users at the center who are concerned about their well-being and avoiding poverty or moving out of poverty through the use of energy. So the users occupy a place of the energy poverty landscape, which is framed by their interest in achieving functional capabilities, in achieving economic capabilities, avoiding trade-offs, and creating conditions for future growth of the community. And then there is the influences from external elements like environment and the changing ecological and weather patterns in the area. So to arrive at this, and following the layered approach of the energy poverty nexus framework, this entire system had to be constructed by looking at a variety of perspectives and pieces that formulate this. So the 5 figures in the slide you see are the different perspectives from the actors and how they see the system, and then putting them all together creates the socio-energy system at Ramgarh. Now, to illustrate how this leads to a better understanding of the energy poverty nexus dynamics, 2 examples from this place. One is how environmental change and climate change is slowly but surely creating a pressure on the community, and which might lead to future challenges to the energy system. So as you can see, if we begin with this box, there is changing climate pattern has reduced the water flow in the stream that generates energy, power. So lower production of electricity leads to actions like greater withdrawal, curtailment of power, and because this project keeps their rates constant, it does not fluctuate for the consumers. This all adds up towards creating a deficit in their financial ability and increasing technical losses. What it does is that it creates feedback loops to the other stakeholders, which are beyond the immediate vicinity of this village, the policymakers, the state implementation agencies, as the project being inefficient and the management being inefficient. And they're blindsided by the fact that there are adaptation measures needed to protect against the phenomena, which is frankly beyond control of these people. So this is a risk that is lowering service quality and pushing people further into a situation where they might have to pay more for electricity or use less and achieve less with electricity. The energy poverty nexus dynamics not only reveals challenges to or deepening poverty, it can also reveal disrupting mechanisms to poverty. So in this figure, I demonstrate how of adaptive and flexible billing and payment system at Ramgarh is actually making people's lives easier and their ability to use energy and create value more. So being an agricultural community, incomes are seasonal and hence payments are seasonal. So the billing and payment system has adapted itself to that cyclic nature of payments. And they have implemented procedures to do case-based imposition of penalties or waivers and deferred payments, which increase the capability of people to continue using electricity even in the months that they are not able to pay, and thus maintain the value creation that electricity does in this place, which has stark winters, wet monsoon, and many other situations that need electricity. And this further results into greater operational autonomy to the community governance and operations and strengthens them. So this example demonstrates how the energy poverty nexus framework can be a primer for transdisciplinary research that integrates a variety of perspectives and kinds of investigations. So some people are interested in macro level investigations in technology transitions or the political economy. This is a framework that offers a space to do that. There are meso to micro level investigations of the techno-economic cause-effect kind of studies that can be integrated here. Then there are the class of micro level investigations or bottom-up agential methods that seem to seek to understand the dynamics at a very micro individual level. And then, of course, there are cross-scale qualitative investigations on social justice, humanities, and the cultural aspects that interlink throughout this infrastructural system and the material system. And then, of course, from a transitions point of view, there are scenario development methods that can be integrated. So the energy poverty nexus as a meta-theoretical framework offers a space to integrate and synergize a variety of different kinds of investigations and create a more holistic, I mean, you cannot claim a whole picture in a complex systems, complex adaptive systems research, but to the best of the ability, a nearly whole picture that is contextual and grounded and co-evolving with the shifting timescales. It is able to reconcile the homogeneity, heterogeneity challenge in research that spans across different layers, and able to accommodate a multiplicity of perspectives, actors, and still maintain coherence and purpose of research. And it's also, more importantly, sensitive to emergent phenomena and actors so that it gives it a anticipatory ability and not just a tool to describe what has happened in the past. Now, a key methodological advancement that was needed to conduct this research and populate the energy poverty nexus framework reasonably was to describe the human interaction and conversion of energy to well-being through a conceptual idea that was not as limited as the energy poverty definitions or not as broad and vague as Nexus, the infrastructural Nexus framings. So that led to the development of the social value of energy concept as a mapping tool to understand the conversion of energy to well-being. So this was first proposed by Miller in 2015 and then developed collaboratively over the years. And basically what the social value of energy as an idea says is that there is some value to be derived by individuals or communities from the use of energy. And this value could be economic or other forms of non-economic value. And also importantly, there are also risks and burdens created by the use of energy and the existence of an energy system in people's lives. And the total value proposition is a function of all these different elements of energy use. So just to illustrate the different dimensions of social value of energy, there are forms of economic benefits, like this community, this women's group in Western Uganda is utilizing their clean energy business and to fund a community initiative for economic capability building. So they are running a restaurant, they are running community agriculture initiatives powered by the revenues and the services provided by clean energy technology in their community. So it's generating economic benefits for this community. There are other forms of non-economic benefits, the most prominent of which is the strengthening of local governance. So this community in Brazil, where I've been working for several years, came together as a collective action group to address parts of their energy challenge. But over the years, over the last 4 years, has evolved into a community governance platform that has far exceeded any expectations of an energy transition and are now a voice in rural transformations and rural capacity building in the region. There are burdens, risks, and consequences which can be serious. So the first and the most visible trade-off that you find is food. People who are burdened with expensive energy services often cut expenses on food and leads to undernutrition in families in seeking energy services. And this is a picture from a community in Philippines where this came out as one of the most prominent thing, and it's a repeating pattern everywhere in the world. It can energy systems can also reinforce social divides in community in places. So in an example, this is an example from Nepal where the caste divide in the community has led to extractive control of the solar project and non-payments and passing on the burden to the weaker sections, and which eventually leads for the project to be financially unstable. So combining the energy poverty nexus as a framework for conducting research that is focused on the human development outcome, and the tool of the, that are presented by this concept of social value of energy that systematically tries to map out benefits and burdens in people's lives, I propose that energy transitions that for futures should be based on a vision of purpose, and a purpose that is described by this idea of energy thriving, which can be thought of as an aspirational state of the energy system where people and communities are able to use energy services to create social value in their lives through the energy systems that sustain and co-evolve with their needs, and are also proactive in identifying and mitigating a variety of risks that lower the achievement of well-being in communities. So I will leave you with that final thought and dwell upon how energy thriving can become mainstream as part of the variety of imaginaries in people's, in scholarship and research and practice, and end here with a final plug to our initiative at the Grassroots Energy Innovation Lab, where we are driven by our vision to build a global network to eradicate poverty through energy innovation. And this is based on the fact that we strongly believe, based on our research and on the evidence that we have collected from working throughout in many parts of the world, is that it's not the lack of energy really that causes challenges, but it's more often it's the presence of an extractive energy regime that creates challenges in people's lives. And so to end poverty and inequality while we transition to a clean energy future requires a new kind of approach that focuses on the intersection of energy and poverty, which I describe here as the energy poverty nexus. Thank you.
Thanks, Saurabh. That was fantastic. In the last 5 years, in international energy policy, we've gotten a lot more sophisticated through things like the multi-tier framework, for example. The World Bank and the Sustainable Energy for All group have been advancing on the supply side of thinking about energy and electricity in these remote, rural, but even urban areas that are currently disconnected from the electricity grid. And what I love about your work is that it brings that same degree of kind of theoretical and conceptual complexity and sophistication to thinking about the demand side as well, and really understanding what it means to think about how energy fits into the complex realities and experiences that are people's lives on a day-to-day basis, not only as kind of individuals and households, but as communities that are situated within larger systems and larger kind of political ecologies, if you will. And so, to see how this has evolved over the last 5 years from a kind of very simple idea of what would it mean to take a user-centered perspective to thinking about energy access to what you've done is really quite great. The other thing I love about your work, which didn't really come out so much here, is just how thoroughly it is committed to enabling change on the ground, right? You gave us a very theoretical perspective today on your work. And I'm wondering if maybe to start, Amanda has given us a question here in the Q&A, but she put it in before the section on the social value of energy. So I think some of it was, I hope, answered by that discussion, but I'm wondering if you might take her question, which is about, how do we think about the relationship between energy and other important aspects of people's lives, healthcare, mobility, food systems, and not just electricity, but fuel. And in many cases, right, electricity access is trading off against already existing fuel regimes in these communities. So when you think about that on the ground in these communities, working with project developers, what are some of the insights that come out of your work for what it means to do projects differently, what it means to design concrete energy systems differently in relationship to your ideas?
Thank you, Clark. So yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I for the sake of time and length, I did not include all of that. But yes, that's been one of the most interesting parts of my research, has been the opportunity to work with grassroots actors, whether they be community organizations or small businesses working in communities to develop their energy systems. So, and a key lesson that has come out, and I'm really glad that several of our partners have learned the lesson together with us, is to understand people's practices of going about their life every day, the challenges that they face, does not necessarily have to be looked at through the lens of energy, but just being challenges in existence, and then finding opportunities of how energy systems can supplement some of those uh, virtuous practices, and to to describe things that create well-being and outcomes for people, and also to find out ways in which innovation can happen in these spaces so that it reduces burdens, it reduces trade-offs, for example, in procurement of fuel, or reduce conflict in the procurement of fuel. I mean, a classic case that comes out from a lot of the places that I've worked in East Africa is the firewood and charcoal challenge, right? I mean, that's it's as a key cooking fuel, and with its own independent ecosystem, poses a lot of challenge for transitioning people to a different kind of fuel, or people being willing to transition to a different fuel, but not being able to, despite that willingness, because of the different kinds of pressures being created. So we have started to look at the drivers and forces that act from the charcoal ecosystem or the firewood ecosystem that can be intervention points for disrupting those extractive loops, and of enabling transitions that are more aligned with people's expectations of well-being and coming out of poverty.
Thanks. Let me just encourage everybody. I know Elizabeth has already been doing so, but there's a Q&A panel. And if you have questions for Saurabh, please go ahead and put your question in the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure to get it answered. Elizabeth, you're also welcome to join us in this live conversation too. Saurabh, let me follow up that question with another one, which is to kind of take it up a couple of notches. There's a huge amount of money at the moment flowing into energy access, particularly in Africa at the moment, focused on the development of micro utilities and mini utilities to serve some of these off-grid communities. Power Hive, of course, gets a huge amount of attention for their work in Kenya, but there are many of these kind of experiments going on. I know you've been both tracking those experiences and have thoughts about them. So I'd love to hear what you have to say in general, but even more narrowly, when I heard you say, that some of these energy systems are extractive, it really made me think about the worries that people have that for these very poor communities, adding an additional service that creates a cost for households without contributing in return significant kinds of economic value, productive use of energy, and so forth, could just end up being more extractive. What are you thinking about? What those micro utilities are doing, and how to make sure that they're generating good outcomes in communities?
I think so. From a lot of evidence that has started to come out of the mini grids in East Africa. East Africa has been a hotbed of micro utilities and mini grids for the last few years now, and now there is some data coming out of that. So and it points to that phenomena which you described as being extractive, is that that additional burden. I mean, electricity is a novelty. Electricity is a need to drive a variety of things in people's lives, but it is also a burden when it's basically people having to rebudget their household expenses to accommodate a new stream of expenses that is at least initially not generating any value. The first uses usually of electricity is lighting, televisions, and other comfort uses, which do not have a direct impact on creating incomes. And because of the lack of attention to understanding usage patterns and the integration of energy use with improving quality of life and economic capability, the rate structure that are designed for most of these micro utility and electricity systems are extractive in the initial phases. So you see phenomena like on and off usage. People use electricity for a few. So what a key thing that comes along with micro utilities in East Africa is the pay-as-you-go system. So you have to pay ahead and to get electricity. So you see data that points towards people using electricity in some weeks of the year and not using electricity in other weeks of the year. And and it strongly relates to the economic capacity of people. And that on and off usage, as you saw from my example from India, is a huge differentiator between what people can consistently achieve over time in terms of value creation and economic ability, and what they cannot if the electricity use is episodic. So that's one major area of concern in micro utilities, is that because that initial phase of utilization of energy or electricity does not fetch economic return, the rate structure has to be very sensitive to the socioeconomic reality of the place. In terms of and why a top-down approach, like you mentioned, the global financing ecosystem that has been funding initiatives of rural electrification and energy access does not see this as a challenge, because they are primarily focused on creating markets. They are primarily focused on getting technology to there, and because their measurements, the parameters of measurements are access, availability of a technology and a service. Their parameters are not focused on utilization and creation of value. So impact assessment, as conventionally that happens in industry, is a post facto phenomena, and it happens at a time at which there's like projects are already collapsed. Off-grid projects, funnily enough, have an average lifespan of 2 to 3 years before they start going downhill financially and technologically, most of them.
This has been just a fabulous talk, and thank you so much. In a previous life of mine, I lived and worked in East Africa. And one of the things that struck me in your talk was that this conversation we're having today about energy is part of an ongoing and long conversation about any development initiatives. And whether the development projects are, like you said, expensive with a short lifetime, who the beneficiaries are, how they change social structures. What in your mind are some things that are particular or unique to energy that we would need to be asking about differently?
Yeah, that is actually a great question. And more recently, been trying to look at that from that comparative lens of what has happened in other sectors. One thing that strikes me as particularly, I don't know, maybe problematic is there is a duality in how energy and electricity is perceived. So in most cases, whether it be governments or other development agencies, people agree that energy is a basic right. It's a basic service equivalent to water, food. There's that agreement and consensus. But on the other hand, when you see the operationalization of several energy projects, they want energy projects to be market entities and fetch profit and be for profit. So we don't talk about water supply as being a profitable entity, as profit driven entity rather than a public service. We don't talk about food systems to be profitable first and then be able to achieve public service. So I think that's a kind of puzzle that I'm not able to find answers to, as to why that disconnect, where on one hand we agree that energy is a basic service necessary for bringing people out of poverty, providing basic services, and then we still want it to be a market-driven initiative and minimize the public welfare aspect of electricity or energy systems in general.
No, I really appreciate that. And this idea of private returns from the poorest people on the planet is also problematic. When back to your earlier kind of extractive setups, have you been able to find, I know in the US, I've spent a little bit of time studying kind of rural cooperatives and how they basically electrified 95% of the United States surface area. And I'm just wondering, have any sort of business models emerged that in your mind kind of address these issues for community development kind of in parallel or a little bit better? And I guess the follow-on piece here is, how would you change the traditional energy development conversation or team going into communities if your goal really were kind of the human element of energy for lifestyles?
Yeah, no, I definitely think the cooperative business model has promise, and there's a lot of potential in creating cooperative business model, but transferring it to, other parts in different situations. Cooperatives have existed, in other domains and everywhere in the world, and with varying degrees of success. The uniqueness that energy brings is that the means of production, the technological means of productions, are fairly sophisticated, need a degree of technological sophistication that is not readily available at the lowest levels of organization. It needs certain forms of actors to drive it. So there's definitely this control of the global political economy that works behind the technology aspect of energy. However, from what I have experienced through my work, and also from what other people I have read, other people reporting, is there's huge opportunities in how cooperatives are innovating in terms of governance models, how cooperatives are innovating in terms of creating co-benefits of energy technology. I mean, a solar panel is a solar panel anywhere in the world. However, the ways people have creatively appropriated solar panels to create different kinds of co-benefits is an area of massive learning. Like water pumping in Nepal is a great example of how people have appropriated at different levels. I mean, entire towns and cities to individual farmers in remote areas, how would they have utilized solar panels to create increased outcomes in water supply and sanitation is a great example. And the organizational structures that have come along with it. Some of it has been traditional indigenous forms of governance that have expanded their ambit to include technology management as part of their activities. And then there have been some new forms of governance and organization collectives that have come up. Like women's self-help groups are a great example that I've found in many parts of India and East Africa to have really strongly taken on distributed solar as a tool to generate a variety of co-benefits. So I think there's a lot of possibility if there is attention and investment in creating those, first identifying those set of co-benefits that are very place-based and relevant to the context of people, and then investing in the capacity of groups to organize around managing and controlling energy technology.
I would just add that we have two younger PhD students, Giamar Rivera Matos and Angel Echeverria from Puerto Rico, who are working on this very question. related to US electricity systems in their home country and or Commonwealth or territory or colony or whatever you want to call Puerto Rico these days. So in a year or so, they will have some amazing things to come on here and tell you about this as well. But it's absolutely clear that these same ideas apply in the United States. They just apply at the very, very bottom rungs of the income ladder, where you have where our policy, which is in many respects a very solid one, of equalizing and levelizing prices for energy for everyone, does very well for many, many people. But at the very, very bottom rungs of the income ladder, it also contributes to these kinds of extractive feedback loops that make it so that communities really struggle with this energy poverty nexus. And it runs much deeper than our current thinking about electricity policy in the U.S.
Well, and I really
acknowledges.
Oh, I was gonna say, I really appreciated how you framed it that way in the beginning. That energy poverty wasn't just something that happens in parts of the world with 1 billion people without access to electricity. And I'm guilty of using those statistics when I start these conversations with students oftentimes, but that in any system you're in. And I think our listeners would be really interested in understanding kind of the red dots that you do have here in North America. And if you could help us understand some of those participants and how you're thinking about kind of these problems and how they present themselves in our own series. And I do want to point out that we had Diana Hernandez from Colombia speak on this last week, and we're having Tony Reams from Michigan speak on this in 2 weeks before, and we had Aaron Mayfield from Princeton talk about kind of this infrastructure design issue. So I feel that the importance of this topic right now, and the importance of this topic for this generation of amazing researchers coming up, and so highlighting and letting us all learn from how you're thinking about the world, I think will be really interesting. But if you could just even share kind of how North America, or what some of the similarities and differences were with some of your other field sites, I'd be really interested.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just begin with some of the things that Diana Hernandez said in her last talk, and it was like, it was striking. And we see that here in Arizona. If you take, for example, the Native American communities are facing the brunt of the energy poverty nexus, not just because of the cost. I mean, the closure of power plant and the effects of living in the shadow of a power plant. Those are several challenges that come together and create challenges for them, right? And then in Phoenix, every summer, Phoenix summers are not really hospitable. So we have more than 100 deaths every summer from heat stroke. And these are people dying inside their homes simply because they do not have the ability to run their air conditioners. So those are real challenges for a group of people who do not get onto the radar of large-scale policymaking or transitions of the energy system. The red dots on the map is a collaborator in Canada that we work with, Clark more specifically, is the University of Saskatchewan, who are engaged in the long-term project of transitioning indigenous communities in the Canadian North to self-supported, self-governed energy systems, precisely because they are facing the brunt of an energy system which is more expensive, which is not really aligned well with their tradition and cultural practices.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it brings home the point, which is also true of Puerto Rico, which is that some of the most expensive energy in our country is in some of the lowest income, and in our continent, it's in some of the lowest income communities. So if you look at a map of North America and you look for that shows the primary energy supply for an average household, for most of the United States and most of Southern Canada, it's electricity. But for these communities, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of First Nations communities across the north of Canada, it's diesel. And it's all diesel that's flown in by airplanes So it's unbelievably expensive diesel, right? And so renewable energy offers a deep alternative. And the team being led by Saskatchewan is just an amazing team. They got $8 million from the Canadian government.
Is that Greg
And
Polzer and some others
yep,
there? Or he's
yep,
fantastic. He's
yeah.
fantastic.
And he was just telling us a couple of weeks ago about some really cool new initiatives from the Canadian government, where the Canadian government is basically building community solar projects in these communities and then handing them over, right? So the government pays for it and then it gives ownership to the communities. And so you take all of that upfront cost away from the community and you turn it into an asset for them. So it's pretty interesting thing.
This is a super important topic, and Dr. Biswas, congratulations on finishing your PhD. I wanted to just give you the last word, maybe a minute or two to kind of wrap up your big thoughts on this topic and where you see it going. And then I'll just end with the next events we have coming up. So thank you for a super day. Thank you, Clark, for really a great hosting job. And really, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you on this important topic. So your final thoughts?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, I really appreciate this opportunity to share my work with you all. And I would just like to, encourage people who are listening to this or may listen to a recording in the future to think about their work in terms of the final effects it creates on the most marginalized of the world. I mean, your work, you may be doing engineering and technology and be looking at a technology transition, and it might appear that it's really not affecting, people are not there in it, but it would carry an impact at some point to people who are like really being left out and marginalized for that. So include that thought. I would like to encourage people to include, it's not really difficult to be inclusive of people and different voices and different perspectives. The energy poverty nexus framework as a meta-theoretical framework is a concept that tries to bridge some of the differences that disciplines might think that their work is isolated, but it really is not. I've tried to demonstrate that by linking the different aspects and worldviews and of different research disciplines. So I think I would just want to end with encouraging people to look through and talk to people in different disciplines and see how their work carries impact for people through the different channels.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate your coming, your speaking this series. And as we move forward to the next event, Stephanie, if you could show that slide. This talk will be available online for others as well. And I know I'm going to make my students in energy and environment watch it next term. But we have for this term, I know a lot of schools were kind of wrapping up before Thanksgiving. Our final speaker will be Tony Reams, who will be talking about spatial, racial, and socioeconomic disparities in residential energy efficiencies from the University of Michigan. But for next term, I have a really exciting roster of speakers lined up, and this talk actually was a great kind of gateway into the rest of the world. I don't know about you, but I've gotten pretty tired sitting in my home office or couch for the last months. And we're trying to have many more international perspectives. And so it talks from China, talks from Africa, talks from other parts of the world that Dr. Biswas, I think, will be bringing in a lot of the different elements you have. So hopefully we'll see you then as well. But with that, everybody, thank you, and we'll be closing today, and stay safe and stay well. Bye, everybody.